Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Light Up Your Metabolism podcast. Today I have a very special guest, an interview for you, Abel James. Abel is, I've been listening to him podcast since 2012, and we recently met in Austin, Texas, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. It just feels like someone who I've listened to for so long, and there he was in the flesh in front of me, and I was so excited to meet him, and he is one of the nicest guys I have ever met, and it's really refreshing when you meet people that you look up to and admire, and they are just as kind as you think that they would be, because not everyone in this space is like that. Most people are, but not everyone is. So I want to tell you a little bit about Abel and what we talked about on the episode. So Abel James is a New York Times bestselling author, top podcaster, and performance coach. He is a leading voice in health and technology for more than a decade. He hosts an award-winning podcast to help people across the world optimize performance, mindset, and longevity. He's also a musician. He is a man of many talents, many passions, and tons of knowledge from having interviewed many of the world's leading experts in health and nutrition for decades. So on today's episode, we got into a topic that I feel like I don't do enough justice talking about on this show, and that is talking about exercise. That's not what we talked about the whole show, but that is a major focus of what we talked about because I don't think I do a good enough job of emphasizing just how important it is to move your body and to be building muscle when it comes to your blood sugar and your insulin sensitivity. I almost want to say that you just will not have optimal blood sugar and insulin sensitivity if you're not consistently moving your body and if you are not working your muscles. I learned from Ben Bickman a while ago that when we don't use our muscles and really contract them in a strong way, those muscles quite quickly become insulin resistant. And so I know a lot of people who follow me and who are my clients, we are more, diet, lifestyle focused in terms of sunlight and lowering carbs and all those things. And while those things can be helpful, it's just something that I feel like I want to really purposefully put more on your mind. And often what comes up for a lot of my listeners and a lot of my clients and followers is that this has happened to me too, and we talk about this in the episode, but the perfectionism that we often tend to bring to this space because we think, oh, I'm not doing XYZ exercise. I don't have time to do all this stuff, so we just end up not doing anything at all. And so what we talk about in this episode are these micro habits to help you achieve peak performance, longevity, support your metabolic health. We talk about why tiny workouts are actually even better potentially than bigger workouts. We talk about why biohacking or your health plan, why it should focus on foundational health principles and not these gimmicks that we're seeing all over social media. We're going to talk about how exercise doesn't need to be this extreme thing, and it doesn't need to be this really long, drawn out workout, but it can still be small, and how to make sure that's really, really impactful, because strength training is crucial for maintaining muscle mass as you age. And I want to share some good news is that the more you exercise, and again, I know not everyone can exercise who is listening to this show, because a lot of my followers have reactive hypoglycemia or some sort of hypoglycemia where their blood sugar is crashing when they work out. But I always want people to start with small workouts. So perhaps you can move your muscles. You can do some bicep curls without overly taxing your body. So I want you all to get creative and think about how to incorporate more small movements to help support these health benefits, and also to be able to get away with eating more carbohydrates, because the idea is not who can have the fewest carbs wins. It's so much more than that. This health is so much more than that, and we don't want to have to be cutting carbs close to zero and then still spiking. I see this happening all the time with my clients, and so a really powerful way to get more glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity is by adding in these workouts. So we talk about so many good things in this episode. I really think you're going to love this conversation with Abel, and I really hope that you get so much out of this episode. And please give me feedback, send a rating, a review, a comment, share this podcast on your socials. Anything really helps more people to find the show, helps it grow, and helps get out that mission to help people have better metabolic health, blood sugar, and a better life. So thank you so much for being here, for listening, and let's dive into the interview with Abel. Abel, welcome to the Light Up Your Metabolism podcast. I'm so happy to welcome you here.
Thanks for having me, Danny. I'm stoked.
Yeah. So you guys, this podcast episode is very special to me already, even though we haven't even recorded it, just because I personally have been listening to Abel since 2012-ish. Does that year sound right? Yeah. Yeah. I remember being in my apartment in New York City, and I was having this total health breakdown, and I was so obsessed with paleo, and you were one of the podcasts that I listened to, and I was like, God, this guy's got a great podcasting voice. And so you were very memorable for me, and were, one of the earliest people that I listened to in this space. And it's really cool to be coming full circle and now having you here on my podcast.
I love it. Yeah, I used to be the young guy. That's not necessarily the case anymore, but it was an incredible time to be coming up in that world, especially in Austin, Texas, because even back then it was starting to be a hub of ancestral health, alternative health, slow food, real food. All those worlds were kind of converging. And thankfully, that's continued to grow. And now, man, talk about a hub. Austin's an incredible place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And we met in person at the Sapiens Center after some conferences, and I'm just like, is that Abel James? What the heck? Like, it's so wild to just see people that you've followed, and just people who you admire in this space just walking around like regular people, and that's cool. I didn't realize that you've been in Austin this whole time. I do remember listening to some podcasts and having Austin on my radar, and knowing that Paleo FX was here and that they opened Picnic. I remember when that opened, which was like an all paleo restaurant. And so I was like, I have to check out Austin for that reason. And now I'm here.
I'm glad you're here. It's the place to be.
Yeah. So you are such an expert in so many things and have so much experience, but I guess we can start with maybe sharing a little bit how, you had the Fat Burning Man show started in 2012. And how have you seen just the podcasting landscape and really this health landscape evolve over time to where it is now in 2025?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. And in the earlier days of, I guess, the modern version of the internet with social media, that sort of thing, like the 2010s or so, starting around, I started recording the podcast in 2011, released in 2012, and I'd been writing blogs a little bit a few years before that. But this is like pre-front facing camera, right? So like podcasts back then, especially in 2012 or so, were largely audio only. And people who had iPhones also tended to be a different type of listener and person who was kind of their own little crowd or whatever, lots of early adopters. So it was this interesting mix of tech early adopters and kind of like health oriented people that had likely already by then been through some traumatic health event, either themselves or someone close to them, that led them to that area of purpose and meaning. So it's like a lot of the people who were involved in those early movements of ancestral health and paleo and that whole thing had been on their deathbed or had reversed a serious condition or had lost an incredible amount of weight or yada, 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 lots of these things. But it's also kind of like pre-influencer, right? Certainly before the word. So it's been fascinating to see the problem go from not enough podcasts, not enough people out there talking about this stuff, to the wider message really getting out there. A lot of people got the memo. Whether it's about nutrition, fitness, or just kind of there's a different way of going about this health thing than what you're traditionally told by the mass media and institutions. So now that memo got out there and the internet has evolved, the challenge is oversaturation of kind of not super meaningful stuff, right? We've got lots of superficial gimmickry gadgets, just like people saying something that's not quite right, which makes you more likely to click on it.
Yeah,
And so
clickbaity stuff.
almost like an intellectual race to the bottom in a lot of ways. So the modern challenge is like, how do you learn in a context where it's just oversaturated with noise, clickbait, misinformation, just like half-baked ideas and all this other stuff that's being rewarded over the real scientists, the people who are writing the books and doing the work, who, because they aren't dancing on TikTok or out there on Instagram showing flesh, they are having a hard time doing their work and doing that research, because it takes a long time for some of these folks to write their work, do their science, like that whole thing. So I think it'll be an interesting challenge, especially in the face of AI, where there's more and more and more of this surfacey stuff that's kind of derivative, and less focus on the people who are generating the original work. And I think we'll have to reckon with that at some point. But it's also something that I'm very optimistic about, because for as many problems as are being presented by AI, I think the amount of problems that it's going to solve will be hopefully far greater than that. So I think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but that doesn't mean that we should get lazy or complacent about where things are going, because we definitely need to keep our eye on the ball. It's tough to be healthy and stay healthy these days, because there are a lot of forces acting against that.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. And I also think that nowadays we're really battling, as you were mentioning, the idea of this like half truth, this sensational sort of divisive statement that's really getting a lot of views and eyeballs. And that what I find is that the truth lies in the nuance, because
Yes.
like you could even have a really great research study, but that doesn't mean that it's going to apply to you. And
Yeah.
so I think that a lot of times that there's nuance to things, and there's a bio individuality to what's going to work for people. And, you know, my posts are like carousel posts are like 18 slides long. And, you know, not everybody has the attention span to read these things anymore. And I think that we're also in a battle against the TikTok brain, where people have 3-second attention span and then they need more dopamine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, are you seeing that too? It's like
Oh,
kind of
definitely.
frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've largely just not participated in that. Pretty much from the beginning, from Snapchat to, TikTok. I was on Instagram for a time, but it was really pre the modern version of Instagram, right? It was more
like
pictures
take a picture of your food,
recipes. Yeah, exactly.
with
or
a
just
filter.
Like a
Yeah.
family trip to the mountains or something like that. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have great results and success getting out there through those platforms. But at the same time, you can become enslaved to them, in the sense that if you're not showing up 4 to 10 times a day, every single day, forever, then you're not getting the success that you want, or you're not getting the same juice, whatever that looks like. And so it can be a slippery slope, and you can't do everything all the time forever. If you have a giant team and endless money to spend, which some of these people who are out there do, and that's worth knowing, that like you can't compete with the people who are just shoving millions of dollars into a PR campaign, this giant machine trying to get out there. So you need to play your own game really well. Do what inspires you to do better work, in whatever form of work that takes. It's going to be different for everyone, but it doesn't mean that everyone needs to be doing all of this stuff, right? And so I've really embraced that over the years, and amazingly have been able to keep going, in many ways. But you have to be really careful with your own energy out there, especially as a, content creator type, because it's endless. You can never create enough. There's always more that you could do, more you could post, more collabs and all this stuff. And so at the same time, we're only here on Earth for a very limited, for a minute. And if you're not careful, you can get wrapped up in the digital world and actually be spending very little time in your own life. And so think back to the times and the memories that matter most to you. And if you're honest, most of them are not on your phone. So I try to literally keep my phone away from my body and off pretty much all the time. And, you know, it's going to work differently for everyone. And TikTok and that sort of short form thing is really great for some people, but I think it's more for entertainment. And if you really want to learn, which is important for our future, especially as AI takes more and more, eats more and more of our lunch, we got to stay sharp. So that means, I think, curling up with a book here and there and like really focusing on, instead of saying, yeah, our attention spans are shorts and they're shot and that's happening to everyone, be like, well, why don't we train to have better attention spans, right? Like that's what I try to do by practicing music and playing songs throughout the day and that sort of thing. It's actively training my focus and training me to get into flow. And I think people can do that with all sorts of different things, whether you're a musician or you like doodling, sketching, dancing. There are many ways to go about this. And most of us, if we're honest, we're not doing these sorts of things enough.
I love the idea of training the attention span. I mean, I feel like this sounds stupid, but it's so interesting that it just didn't dawn on me. So I'm hearing you say that and it's like, oh yeah, like if this is eating away at my attention span, this habit that I have, and my platform is mostly based on Instagram. So it is like a double-edged sword going in there to check on something for work, and all of a sudden I'm like, no. But for me, I sort of support myself with different app blockers. I find those to be helpful, and I'll only allow myself it's like, okay, 5 minutes. It's like, oh, 15 minutes. And it's like, wow, that went by in a blink of an eye. And
Yeah.
it's really scary. So, but the idea of training the attention span with longer form things, this mono focus, like, can you talk more about that in the flow state? That's really interesting.
Oh, it's the best. And so many
Okay.
people haven't really like experienced it that much, or certainly not lived there.
Yeah.
But do yourself a favor when you wake up in the morning, just keep everything off and away from you. Maybe it's a Sunday or whatever day that you can do this. And try to, for the entire morning or as long as you can, but let's say 11 or 12, you've got the whole morning from when you wake up until that time when you need to check your phone or respond to emails or do whatever. And carve out time to create something, to embrace that space within you and get away from some of that chatter. Like a lot of people have trouble meditating and they say it's too noisy, it's too busy in there. And I think that's largely due to the fact that you're kind of disconnected from yourself, right? There's your subconscious brain and your conscious mind are not quite aligned. And when you can sit down with, I use notebooks like this, sketchbooks, basically, and they start out as an empty page. Mm-hmm. And every day I'm filling up at least one page. And usually that's just with things that I'm crossing off that I'm doing. But more often it's paragraphs, it's ideas, it's questions for the next podcast. It might be another song idea. And I kind of jump around from creative thing to creative thing. Sometimes like writing books of poetry or writing a more functional, practical book like around health, that sort of thing. The way that I get it done is by setting aside those mornings, generally speaking, and then just having a couple of hours where you can sit down and make something happen, And it doesn't need to be something that you ever sell. In fact, it's probably better if it's not, because you're not here to sell widgets with this sort of practice. What you're here to do is to align more deeply with who you are, where you want to go. And so, once again, it doesn't mean that you need to be some flagrant artist in any way. Mm-hmm. You don't need to be sharing this with the world. But these sorts of practices, or even just having that little bit of space in the mornings to be with your thoughts and be with yourself and get comfortable there, and then just kind of open your ears to whatever's out there. You might be surprised to find that there are ideas floating through the sky at all times. It's just like we're not usually listening. But if you ask any accomplished songwriter or people who have written books or screenplays, things like that, they know, and they're very honest about the fact that it didn't come from them. It wasn't something that they pushed out or came from their ego in some way, or even their intellect. It's a bit bigger than that. And so that requires being very open and receptive in an unusual way for most Westerners, and almost a magical way if you think about it that way. And it might sound woo or silly or frivolous or childlike even, but if you shut that part of you off, then what are you doing? I mean, like
Yeah.
how are you in touch with your dreams? How are you in touch with your spirit and the true reason that you're here if you're not taking a minute to really embrace where you're coming from, where you're going, what you're going through, and processing that however way you can, whether it's just playing with charcoal and sketching or writing down ideas, or even just being silent. These sorts of things, for me anyway, and for a lot of the more creative people I know, are the way that they write books, make albums, poetry comes out, or they just come out with these outrageously cool entrepreneurial ideas. It's because you set up that space, and then when you're kind of in the groove of it, I think it's also important to do what you can to process whatever is going through your subconscious mind. Pay attention to your dreams, like the ones when you're asleep, those kinds of dreams.
Yeah.
Because if you are kind of in the rhythm of that and you start writing down just a sentence, if you can remember it, you're more likely to build up that practice and remember more and more and more as time goes on. And that can really help you work through things, get creative ideas. And once again, it's those 15 minutes or hours that you spend scrolling around that you don't even remember the next day. You don't even remember after those 15 minutes or like immediately. It's just gone, vaporized. Yeah. Isn't it a lot cooler if you made a sketch of your cat, you know, and you could just like, whoa, the day wasn't a total loss. I guess that's goofy and fun. You know? So embrace that inner child that most of us have, and you'll oddly probably become a lot more productive.
I love that. Yeah, that's so good. I feel like you tapped into a flow state when you were answering that, and you could see this passion shining through of this being connected, being where your mind and your body are in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
I've been trying to do screen-free sunsets, and
Nice.
so I sit out here and watch the sunset, and with my little mosquito racket, and it's been like a really beautiful practice because my mind is like, I'm bored, and it's like, okay, boredom is good for you, and it's like, oh, I should check my phone. It's like, oh, interesting how like you just hear these impulses coming across because it's so habitual. So typically before I started doing a lot of work, I would have judged myself for that, or, I would have reached for the phone, but you don't have the phone in the house. And then you're just sitting there and you're like, okay, well, what can I do now? And it's just like, oh, wow, the sky looks beautiful. And look at the pattern of that bark on the tree. And like, oh, there's a little bug, like a cute little spider crawling over like the arm of my chair. And you become present, and you just become this observer, and you hear the noise and you see the way the tree's moving, and you're entertained in a nice, beautiful, slow way. And then, I love what you were saying about like tapping into things that maybe you could start with. What did you love to do as a kid? Your inner child. Like I used to love to color and make crafts. And I actually bought a sun catcher, little kit that I can make sun catchers. I'm like, I have to get that out because that's something that I want to do, is make sun catchers and do all these crafty things. Like that was me as a kid. And I also love what you said about the subconscious mind and getting things out. I started a practice called Journal Speak. It's, I don't know if you know Dr. John Sarno. He's like this mind-body connection of pain. Well, this woman, Nicole Sachs, she's like continuing on his work, and she wrote a book called Mind Your Body, which I can't shut up about. And it's it's a methodology on helping to heal chronic pain and chronic symptoms. And, above all, it's that we have this emotional reservoir that overflows, and then we get symptoms. Our body is sensing these repressed emotions and traumas that are living in our fascia and in our tissues. And what I've started doing is actually every night I do a journal speak practice where I write. I sometimes open the floor to my inner child, and she goes off. She's like, I'm so jealous that my cousin looked like Baby Spice and I looked like Britney Spears. I don't want to look like her. I want to be Baby Spice. It's like this 12-year-old, like a big problem for me as a 12-year-old. And, I got to feel that. And, my childhood best friend moving away, and like I was crying, and so there's so many things that just live in our body, and we don't realize, and there's such a lightness when we're expressing our emotions. And I just think that so many times, by our practices of not being in the same place as our body and our mind at the same time, even some health practices are this form of like avoidance. And so we can be avoiding feeling by, well, I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to go, like, get my grounding in. And so it can be a form of avoidance too, if we're not careful with that. So I loved talking about that piece of like getting the stuff that's in our subconscious mind, and just trying to get it out and trying to get in touch with what that is. And sometimes it really does come from the stillness that we all want to avoid, because there's uncomfortable things there, right?
Yeah. I actually had a really interesting conversation with a good friend of mine who is a college buddy who is a very accomplished visual artist. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And he was talking about how trendy psychedelics have been the past few years. Yeah. And I certainly experimented for a time, and we were talking about that. And he said, I think I've never done it, he says, but I'm pretty sure I've gotten there. And I'm like, so when you're doing the art, you feel this immense presence, right? And he's like, yeah. And then you kind of have that soft gaze, and you're taking everything in, and things are kind of like crystallizing, moving, turning into shapes. He's like, that's exactly where I get when I'm painting outside, plein air. And I'm just like, I totally believe that. And that also, to me, was the goal of experimenting with psychedelics, was to find a place, know that it was there, and then find my own way of getting back, right? And so I thought that was such a powerful example, though, of when you actually just train for presence and for focus, like he has for his visual field, for his, he sees the world differently than we do, because he's been so focused on color and shape and studying all of these things for so long. It is just absolutely incredible to behold. But I think the point for people listening is that you don't need to go to all these extraneous and extreme, sometimes, examples of what other cool kids are doing. Drugs, for example. Like those have been reportedly cool for a long time, and there's obviously a big appeal. But at the same time, if you're willing to kind of walk a different path, like my friend Dave did, then you can still get there. It just takes a different type of approach. But we can all do this also, right? Like that morning space, he's doing it with the visual stuff. Similar things can happen with sound if you work on your other senses. So it's definitely something to explore, working on heightening your own sensitivity instead of chasing this external dopamine hit, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like you sort of touched on like all these other things that, people are doing. And I feel like one of the new sentiments that I'm sort of feeling for the past several years in the health space is like the latest and greatest, biohack and tool and these things that, like, what are some things that you feel like is more like just hype versus really helpful? And I know that you were in the biohacking space for a long time. So can you just kind of talk to us about how, just what you think about that space, and maybe where it sort of went wrong or deviated, or just your reflection.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely a worthy pursuit for people to quantify their own health, track their own health, and then make actionable changes that really show up in their life down the road. But what we've seen really for many years, and biohacking is a term that's been used for some time now, but this approach and this way of thinking about it has just been called different things over the years. Quantified self is what it was called kind of until the early 2010s, and kind of before that, there were different ways of looking at this. But the point is, there are multiple ways of training, and you can train and you can experiment with an extraordinary amount of different things that all pretty much come down to supporting the body around the fundamentals. So what I mean by that is if you're talking about infrared panels and red light and light therapy, all of this is great. And I am a big fan of a lot of these panels and light therapy in general. But the reason that it works is because our bodies are tuned to the sun and naturally respond to those frequencies in various ways. And so under the optimal conditions, you wouldn't really need anything more than the sun and the ground and the local food around you and that sort of thing. And so if you can go in that direction, there is usually a very inexpensive and relatively easy and straightforward method of achieving the same means. So another example, doing pull-ups, which engage your core instead of getting an ab shocking belt.
Yeah.
The ab shocking belts have been around for a long time, right? Like the gimmickry was going hard in the 80s, right? Like when we were coming up, I remember all sorts of crazy fitness stuff. There was a huge, well, you could see lots of different bubbles pop over the years with these health trends and fads coming and going. And some of them are hilarious and wonderful to behold. But the point is, if you're not doing the fundamentals, like waking up and looking for the sun as soon as you possibly can to get those light, those various wavelengths of light on your skin, on your eyes, and the rest of your body. If you're not taking a walk around mealtime and hopefully several times a day and doing some level of strength training, if you're not focusing on getting an adequate amount of protein, which most people don't these days, then you shouldn't be focusing on expensive gadgets that are going to vibrate your way to health or do your working out for you, or taking experimental gene editing technologies, or like all sorts of pretty wild stuff, hormone replacement that people are doing very nonchalantly without necessarily knowing the long-term risks, especially if you get on some of this stuff at a young age. Like, these are things that should be saved for later. So the way that I like to think about it is, especially if you're younger, and you don't necessarily have the money to spend and there isn't anything seriously wrong with you, embrace the simple, cheap stuff and just find a way for most of it to show up in your day-to-day life. Even if it's a simple thing, like instead of drinking, 5 to 10 beers on a crazy night, it's like, what if you drank 2 or 3 or even half it, like what if you whittled that down over time to something that is not going to be a huge problem later? Like, embracing the subtraction instead of the addition is going to get most of the people the results. But at the same time, I've experimented with all sorts of different technologies. PEMF, I actually have some going right now over here.
I love
red
my
light
Align
therapy
mat.
can be great. What was that?
I love my Align mat, which is a PEMF mat,
Yes.
which has the harmonics of the Schumann resonance. So yeah, it's my
Exactly.
favorite. It's my favorite biohacking device ever. But I'm not super into those devices because I have the foundations dialed in. Like, I'm outside grounded in
Yes.
tons of infrared light right now that's bouncing off the trees. So pardon if you hear lawn tools and squirrels and and birds.
Great.
But yeah, it's like, that's to me is the most important thing, is like focusing on the stuff that is actually more free, because and if you don't have those things, the supplement's not going to save you. A supplement is supplemental to having these foundations dialed in, for sure. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Yeah. Oh, not at all. Similar thing with cold plunging. And, you can do cryotherapy and you can spend a fortune on some of these things that make you cold in unnatural ways, you might argue. Which also, as soon as you stray into the technological, unnatural kind of like hyper results spot, you open yourself up to more risk, right? Yeah. So if you're kind of engaging in some of these technologies that are trying to get faster results than a cold plunge in less time, that sort of thing, could be great. Also might come with some serious risks. So that's just one example. But I've never been a huge fan of cold plunges because I grew up in New Hampshire taking cold showers, like not by choice. And I've been cold enough for a lifetime with all those raw mornings. But what I try to do, especially when I lived in Colorado, but also in Austin, is expose my body to cold. So I'm not like loading up a tub with ice or cold water, but I am getting outside and getting my body exposed to as much cold and heat as possible. Essentially, I'm just spending as much time outside as I can. And the time that I am inside, there are some, usually cheap and relatively straightforward hacks, like getting a better light that doesn't have the worst wavelengths, or you can do incandescent. You can also just like be in front of a window,
Yeah.
be grounding throughout the day and various things like that. So anyway, there are an extraordinary amount of things that you can try. But I just had Mark Sisson on my podcast, who has tried an enormous amount of things. And he was talking about stem cell therapy and how he went down and went to a foreign country because you can't do a lot of this stuff in the States and their regulations and that sort of thing. And he got down there, and as soon as he did with him and his family, he was like, oh, I don't know if this is the right call. But he went through it anyway, and they got some stem cells. He said that he didn't notice any particular benefit, but a friend of his went down to the same place a few weeks later and got basically the same procedure, went into shock and died. And I've heard multiple stories that are like this, where you can kind of just go and do these things and sign up for this medical tourism and biohacking, whatever, in other countries, and everything should go fine. But sometimes it doesn't. And I would just caution people to, before you try a lot of the exogenous things, the things that are coming from outside your body, especially when you're talking about pharmaceuticals, gene editing technology, hormone replacement, but even like peptides and certain things that have been around for a while, but we're not exactly sure what some of these things do. I am much more inclined to encourage people to embrace, herbal options that have been around for a long time, supplements and lifestyle changes and dietary changes, and getting quality sleep over some of these things where, man, you can get surgery for a problem and they'll sell that pretty quick, or you can just kind of like work on the fascia sometimes and don't have to get the surgery. And so I see things that way, where yes, you can go heavy handed and you can try to live forever and be enslaved to your routine that kind of gets you there, hopefully, or you can try to be a little more scrappy about it and take on a lot of self-responsibility and be like, do I need a new hip, or am I just moving wonky? And do I need to like make some corrections here? Because if we're honest about it, like if you're moving poorly and you can't like bend over because you don't have the flexibility in your 40s or something like that, what does that look like at 60 or at 80? Like, we need to focus on these things before they become major problems. And usually that means doing the simple, often inexpensive, but sometimes hard to implement thing right now, as opposed to waiting for the big technological gadgetry to save us in the future.
Yeah, I absolutely. I went to JJ Virgin's talk at Health Optimization Summit last weekend, and she's like, there's a whole room behind me of all these biohacks. And she's like, if you're not exercising, don't waste your money on all of these things, and that's something that I told you offline, but it's something that I don't talk about enough on this show is the movement and exercise piece, and how important it is to our metabolic health. And for so many people, it just can seem like such a mountain. It could just seem so hard to fit in because people are just so busy. And I feel like it's the first thing for a lot of people to fall off. Then there's those other people who are like diehards, and actually like my mom, where it's like, you put it in first, exercise goes in first, and everything else goes around it. And like, I feel like that's who I aspire to be. I've been way more consistent than in the past, but is there, like, you're obviously consistent with your working out. So can you talk to us about maybe some ways to reframe things, or just simple things that people can do to help support them in getting movement in, because it just is so important for everything. And it is like one of the ultimate original natural biohacks.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people will be well served by just keeping it small. It doesn't have to be, what you're usually sold is this 90-day program, or this like get hard, get strong, like yada, 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 and just like dedicate yourself to being in a basement and becoming a beast or something like that. Like, it really doesn't have to be that way. If you want an extraordinary transformation to piss off your ex or something, maybe that's appropriate. But if you're looking for long-term health, then it's really about the small things. And so for me, one thing that made walking easier for me to do, and it's just not cool to like go for a walk, right? Or say that you're a walker, right? Or just, like putting it into it doesn't sound as cool as saying you're a runner, or I do CrossFit, or, I do Krav Maga, or I do jujitsu. Like, walking doesn't sound that cool. In certain circumstances isn't that fun, but you can certainly make it fun and you can make it cool. But when I wore a CGM, as many people have experienced wearing a continuous glucose monitor for a while, if you look at what happens when you eat a meal and you don't work out that day at all, the amount that your glucose spikes and then crashes is fundamentally different and way more extreme than the days that you go for even a short walk around mealtime. And compared to the days that I actually go for, a decent run or do a decent strength-based workout, I can almost eat anything I want, including a large amount of sugar and carbs, without compromising my metabolism, because my muscles are hungry for it and I need the glycogen at that point. And so when you can link up how you feel and how you perform to how you're fueling, and also see that that the way that you're moving changes the way that you feel in such an incredible way, it's something where the times that I haven't been able to exercise because of injury or what have you, I do not feel like the same person. My brain doesn't work as well. And so for me, knowing the difference in what that feels like, and kind of registering that and having a deep memory of what that feels like, I kind of made that commitment to be like, don't get back there. Now, you have to make adjustments, though, as the years tick by in the face of injury and things that come up in life. And so how do you keep that going? Well, once again, the simplicity of walking around mealtime, even if you don't have a dog, pretend that you do, and take yourself on a walk in the morning and in the evening. And so that small amount of movement doesn't really need to be tracked. As long as you're just doing it most days, that's going to add up to extraordinary things over time. But I would also encourage people to focus on strength training, balance training, mobility. If you look at what happens to people over the course of time, and as you age, you lose muscle. And once you start losing muscle, and you start losing symmetry in the way that you move, and you start losing balance, these things are not so easily reversed. And so maintaining your muscle mass over time is extraordinarily important for women as well as men. But that requires strength training, that requires resistance. And so that may seem somewhat unnatural to a lot of us raised in the States, because we have to artificially put this stuff back into our lives. But I was just down, as we were talking about offline, in El Salvador and Costa Rica, where I saw many octogenarians, people in their 70s and 80s, carrying baskets balanced on their head up mountains, up volcanoes at elevation, just like crushing it.
Wow.
And that, isn't something they're doing in a performative way. They're not like tracking that on some fitness counter app or whatever. It's like, this is what they're doing just to live. And so this was in many ways required for every single one of us until just a few decades ago. And so realistically speaking, that means that you do need to insert this movement, this ancestrally appropriate movement, into your life in whatever way that you can. And there's just no way out of it. There's no device that I've found that will, and trust me, I've had many thousands of dollars of devices sent to me saying that they can do all sorts of things, but I haven't tried a single device that can exercise for me or make me feel as good as I feel after I've even done a moderate, exercise session. But it might surprise some people to learn, if they're familiar with my work anyway, that I'm not someone who's exercising all the time at all. I do generally one strength training session a week, and that'll be around 45 minutes. And I'll try to do at least one run a week, which is also, I'll put sprints in that run. It's kind of just like walking for some of it. So it's more like a hike in the woods that I'll do at least once a week. And so those are the two big workouts, but I also kind of love them. They make me feel better. And if you look at the research also, strength training, if you're male, increases your testosterone. And there aren't many things that do it as effectively. And so all these guys screaming for just I need testosterone, I want more testosterone. And they're taking it exogenously, which is in many ways irreversible in terms of what it's doing to your body. It's man, just you do some deadlifts and you're going to feel like a hero and look like one pretty soon too.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are the two big workouts sprinkled with walks throughout the week. And then I'll take one solid rest day a week as well, and just give myself a break if I'm not feeling up to it. Like I don't try to push it too much. And then also tiny little workouts, like for 1 or 2 days a week, my entire workout that day, aside from the walks, are 12 reps of pull-ups. That's nice. It. But I got my blood flowing, and I feel like I pushed it, and that's all it takes. So give yourself that easy win on the days that you don't have the time to dedicate to it. And it could be air squats, it could be push-ups, it could be pull-ups, you could be at a gym. You don't have to be. But I would encourage the people out there who don't do this to do some sort of interval and burst training, like intensity training, where you're really trying to get up to red line. You're approaching your VO2 max, and you're doing that about once a week, because the metabolic benefits of that are just insane. And they also cascade into other parts of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. I like how you talked about that. You can just do almost like exercise snacks. It doesn't, you don't have to think about setting aside an hour or 45 minutes for a workout. You can do really quick things. I mean, my mom is a huge fan of doing like a 15 to 20 minute video on YouTube, and she just watches it and does it. And she's like, you just feel so accomplished, and you put it in at the beginning of the day. And so, I love that thought too. And for me, what's worked really well for me, so I used to be really into acro yoga, and I did a lot. I was a flyer. I got thrown in the air, and
I didn't know that.
Did lots of flips, and I fell a lot because that's what happens when you train. And so I had a lot of injuries, and then I was like weight training and strength training, and I also got a lot of injuries. And so I would have to take so much time out. And it was really hard to take that break from something that you love, because a movement practice, for me, I love doing movement that I love, because that's what gets me to really do it. Yeah. And so I found Reformer Pilates recently. I didn't find it, but I decided to do it. And scheduling those classes for me has been really great, because there's a cancellation fee, and so you're held accountable, and you find classes you like, you find the teachers you like, and that is what kept me going. And now I feel like I've rehabbed my joints enough, and I feel like I have a stronger base to now add on some weightlifting on top of that. So I've recently added in some more weightlifting, but I also love to dance. And so I go to dance events, or I'll just like throw on music and just be moving my body. And so it can be like, if there is something that you think is fun for you, like if you love riding bikes and like you feel like it's an adventure, like get in movement, it doesn't have to look a certain way. Although I would say, like you said, getting in some sprints and getting in some, something where you're pushing yourself and building muscle, especially as you get older, is going to be really important. But start with something that you could be consistent with. Start with something that you could, or maybe you like variety and you have a little menu of options for yourself, but, enlist a buddy. There's all sorts of ways to get more consistent, but it's that I think for me, when I was not working out and struggling with the injury and not wanting to get hurt, and like, I felt kind of lost, and I was like, well, I don't want to do this stupid workout, because if I'm only doing one workout, I need it to be so worth it, and I need it to be so good. And so it's a perfectionism thing that comes in. And I know a lot of my listeners are also recovering perfectionists. And so it's like, have an imperfect workout, right? Like, so can I do an imperfect workout, not work out every part of my body, but do something and feel like, just look at myself and look at yourself in the mirror, have compassion, and be like, you did a great job. That was so much better than doing nothing, right? Because what we end up doing is nothing, because it's not the perfect workout. And then we've just done nothing for months on it. So that's where it's like, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. Do a minimally good workout is better than no workout, right? So,
yes. Yeah. And that's one reason I call it like a strength workout and a running workout. Because it's not programmed out. Generally, I'll do similar things. I have a good idea of what it's going to be. But on the days that I'm feeling it, I'll go. On the days that I'm not feeling it, it won't be the same workout. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing. And I also have struggled with the same recovering perfectionist type stuff. And so that's one way that you can start to handle that. You don't say, oh, I'm going to hit my personal best today in deadlifts, and if I don't, I'm a huge failure. It's more like, I'm going to do a strength workout today. And, if that means air squats because I just didn't have time and I couldn't fit it in, then I'm doing air squats. And hopefully, later in that week, I can do one that's a little bit more serious. But we do need to be open with that flexibility and also be kind to ourselves. And it's like you brought up injury. I think a critical thing that's not talked about enough as well is, like, one of my main workout strategies is to not get hurt, to not get injured. And that is not necessarily at the top of everyone's priority list. So put it at the top of yours. Because once you get hurt, it is really hard to stay in shape. And once you get seriously injured and you have to deal with that, then of course that becomes a much, much more intense challenge. But I will say, if you're out of shape now, it is difficult to get back into shape, but it's way easier to maintain the shape that you're in and just stay there than it is to get into shape. That does take a lot more effort to get there, but it doesn't have to be an incredible amount of effort over a short amount of time. That can be spread out and get you to that nice maintenance level. Just let time work for you and stay consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I find that if my ego is involved, then I'll get hurt. So I'm like, I want to do a deadlift, and I want to I want to put these plates on. And it's like, you shouldn't be deadlifting right now. Like you haven't hinged in a really long time. And so I got some programming from a friend who's a really good trainer. And she said, use a kettlebell and do like single arm, overhead press with the kettlebell. And so I racked it and on my arm, and it was like 35 pounds, and I did it fine on my right. And then I go to my left and I was like, it hurt. I was like, dumbbell it is, like 20-pound dumbbell. That's what I have. So dumbbelling it up, throw in a couple extra reps. That to me was like my sticking point, where it's like, I want to do the same on both sides. I want to do the kettlebell and not the dumbbell. And so it's like, that's where I have to check myself. I'm like, longevity, we have to stay healthy, no pain, no tweaks. Like, you gotta, be really smart about this, because you're playing the long game. It's not just about no one is here watching me do this. I'm just, doing it on my own. I'm not competing in the CrossFit games. You could do the dumbbell, it's okay. So, starting with body weight, I've been doing a ton of body weight with Pilates and a lot of resistance there. But if you haven't picked up a weight, don't start with weight. Don't get, don't think that you have to start there, and work with a trainer or, and I've been doing a ton of mobility stuff. Well, I haven't done it in a while, but I have in the past. I need to get back into that.
We all could do a little more.
Yeah. Have you heard of functional range conditioning, FRC? Yeah. I'm a huge fan of FRC. And that really helped rehab me from a lot of injuries. But it, it keeps your joints strong, and you could see these weak points as you're doing the cars and the controlled articular rotations and stuff. So yeah, pretty cool.
Totally.
Yeah. So, all right, let's see where we want to go from here, because I feel like we've talked about so many different things, but I guess one thing that you have a degree in psychology, right? Yeah. And so let's talk about the psychology of change. So what is it that people are up against when it comes to changing their habits? Why can it be so hard for people to change, in addition to some of that perfectionism stuff that we may have already brushed upon?
Yeah. Most of our habits and most of our actions happen automatically without us really considering them or making an active decision. We just do what we normally do, almost on autopilot. And so to actually enact change in your life, it means violating your day-to-day routine and your normal. You need to break your normal. And so that's kind of strange, because does that mean your life is broken? Does that change anything? We're kind of suspicious of this change. And there are evolutionary reasons for that. But understanding that you're kind of up against that, then you can make certain changes to help this like show up in your calendar. So basically that's what I literally do is I look at the calendar and look at people's schedules. And if you want to make some of these changes happen, then put it in there and make that your new normal. Don't pay attention to the thing that you would normally just get up and do and go from one thing to the other. Make that change. And so for the first few repetitions of that change, it's going to feel weird. But the more times that clicks by and happens, the closer that becomes to your new normal, right? And then all of a sudden you've got a brand new normal autopilot day. And so if you can take your autopilot day from decisions that, are, I've got it's 3 p.m. I'm a little bit bored. I could use a hit of energy. Maybe I'll get a Coke. Or if you're really good at Diet Coke, right? Just kidding, by the way. It's like, are you reaching for that thing because it's going to serve you and your health over time? Like 20 years later, would you thank yourself for drinking however many thousands of Cokes that would be over the course of those years? Or do you go for a walk, right? And like see what those thousands of walks would add up to over time. So for me, I really try to zoom out and look at these changes as, oh man, just like a tiny, tiny little tweak will add up to extraordinary things down the road. Or, for example, a normal amount of drinking for a man in the States is about 2 drinks a day, which is, 2 drinks a day, and it's 1 for women, typically. And that's not a very large amount of drinks on a weekly basis, even, you're talking a little bit more than a dozen drinks. But every year, right, if you're talking 2 drinks a day, over 700 drinks, or 350 drinks ish, if you're a woman, that sort of thing. And so if you're looking year over year over year, how many years of 700 drinks are going to add up to a huge problem? Or, conversely, if you turned those into a light walk or a romantic walk with your partner or something like that, or a walk with your dog, like how many more months of life might you have if you swap that bad automatic decision for a good one? That's what we're looking at. And it doesn't make, enacting these changes any easier in your own life, but hopefully it raises the stakes a little bit such that you can see that making these little changes, even if you go from drinking 2 drinks a night to 1, that could be a magnificent change for your financial reality, your physical reality, and all sorts of other things. And so, making change is hard. Also, there's a lot of friction that can come from social groups. So be careful about kind of how that might be holding you down. If it's a crabs in a bucket situation where people are really getting after you for trying to make positive changes in your own life, that's a red flag. It doesn't mean you need to abandon the relationship, but you might want to consider joining a group of like-minded people who are more supportive of your goals, because that's a long-term play, and you do get to choose your friends. Maybe not over the short term, but certainly over the long term. So if you choose your friends based upon the people who are really aligned with your vision of the future, and hopefully you're supporting them toward their health and life goals, and vice versa, that can make these changes a lot easier when you're not the weird one for ordering the hamburger with a lettuce wrap, because everyone else is too. That's where you want to be, where you're not kicked out of the group for being the one who's making reasonable, healthy decisions.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. And that's what I feel blessed to have friends who are now like really aligned with even just my schedule, because your circadian rhythm. I do have friends, like a lot of my friends where I lived before I lived in Austin, they would all be going out and they'd stay out, and I don't drink. So I wasn't like, had that inertia to keep going. I was like, I'm getting tired, and I would leave early, and I'd wake up at sunrise and do my thing. And it's different here in Austin, because I'll go out, and me and my best friend Molly will both have our blue blockers on, and we're going to be like, oh, it's like 9:30, you want to leave? So it is important who you surround yourself with, and then being able to have conversations with these people. And if you feel like you can't have a conversation where you can tell them about a new health endeavor that you're embarking on, or you can't ask for their help, like enlist their help, like, hey, it would really mean a lot to me if you would help support me in this. And, I really want to stay consistent because this has been really helping me. And it would really mean a lot to me to have your support and to help me, stay on track. Like, if you feel like you can't have a conversation with with a person like that, then to me, that is also a little bit of like a red or a pink flag that this person doesn't have your best interest at heart, and they're maybe focused on what they might be losing from you changing, or what it may be reflecting in them, that maybe they're assuming that you're thinking that you're judging them or something like that. So all these types of things can come up when we're about to change. And so there's a lot of forces at play, from the internal stuff to the external stuff, that can keep us stuck and can keep us in the same place.
Yeah. We're just wired that way. We kind of want to stay stuck, but we can change that. We can work with that.
Yeah. And even just knowing, like, your nervous system doesn't want you to be happy. It wants you to be safe, and it wants the same thing. And so just reminding yourself that you are safe. Like, hey, I'm going on this walk and I'm going to shuffle some things around, or I'm going to this class or this gym, or like cooking new food or new grocery store, and it's okay. And it's new, and it's new can be scary, but I'm safe. And so that little mantra in the back can definitely be helpful for those of us who are really struggling. So I guess, where do you see, you're writing a book on longevity. I want to hear about that. And I guess, where do you see maybe we did talk about like the future of health and AI, but if there's anything else you want to tie in with your book, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Well, there does seem to be a bifurcation or a divide between kind of the world of ancestral health and natural health and the world of performance, which, in many ways is the same, except that there's like the natties on one side, who are really honoring nature and not doing any sort of artificial stuff to get results, at least exogenously, with putting stuff into their bloodstream or what have you. And then there's this other branch of, you could call them biohackers or longevity people. I'm not sure if they have like an exact word yet, but it might turn into transhumanism. It's at some point, is my worry, right? Where there's this other side where it's like, oh, we've got technologies and we've got drugs and we've got other things that can get us better results than nature can. Let's go guns blazing in pursuit of health and longevity, right? So now these folks are also in the world of health. And part of the conversation, in many ways, leading the conversation in some cases. Like, what? How did you get here? You've been here for okay. But I guess I can see where these each are going. And there's a temptation to hop on the train of doing the external stuff, the hypey stuff, and the things that are going to be marketed to us in the years ahead. But if we look at the past as any indication of the future, certainly in the world of pharmaceuticals, there have been many miracle drugs, using air quotes, that have been sold as miracle drugs for many years that ultimately caused huge problems down the road. Lo and behold, so many. And this is going to happen with almost every pharmaceutical, I would assume, that there aren't going to be major inventions in the near term that are going to give you a free lunch from almost anything, because that's just not how biology works. Now, I do think that we should remain optimistic for new technologies that could help us live better, heal faster, that sort of thing in the future. But we're not there yet. As far as, whether we're talking about stem cells or peptides, hormone replacement, all these exogenous things, like, they have a time and a place. But for most people, it's not for you. It's going to be a waste of money, a waste of time, or far too risky. Yet, what you're going to see from the internet and the TV and the movies and all the rest of it in the next few years is that this is the solution. Whatever this thing is, whether it's a shot, a pill, procedure, something you shoot up your nose, like, who knows? we are always going to be sold these things. But at the same time, those fundamentals, those people, those natties on the natural side who have been eating real food and doing functional fitness and all the rest of this stuff, this has always been working at the same time. And so these people on the other side who are still doing these experimental things, they're trying to live forever. Some of these things, like Brian Johnson, for example, recently admitted that one of the drugs that he was taking that he thought was extending his lifespan was in fact shortening his lifespan. So it's like, how many of these things that you're obsessing over and dedicating your life to in pursuit of extending your lifespan are in fact shortening it, and you're wasting the time obsessing over it. So anyway, even though there's going to be a lot more bluster, there's going to be a lot more FaceTime from the folks who are kind of just like doing whatever they can to get to that health result, performance result, aesthetic result, whatever it may be. You're going to hear a lot more from that side. But at the same time, trust me, that natural stuff will always still be working. So just go ahead and wake up and do that.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like the take home is get outside, move your body, save money by doing those things. Yeah. But yeah, and I think that there's, a time and a place to dip into that other side in the case of needing healing, because we didn't have the same we didn't grow up in the same environment as our ancestors. My ancestors didn't take 40 rounds of antibiotics in their youth, and get their tonsils removed, and they're not living down the street from a cell tower, and, they're not on Zoom all day. And so it's just, we are living in a different world. And so I do feel like sometimes we do need to dip into that world for some targeted support, because we, I for one have tons of mycotoxins, and I'm not able to detox them easily. And so that's the world that I'm in lately. And so, I'm
familiar with that world, by the way.
Oh, you are. We'll have to talk after. But, I'm outside every single day as much as I could possibly be, and it's not getting rid of them. So I'm, needing to go into other avenues. And so I don't want people to also think that like, oh, I'm broken because I went out in the sun and I didn't lose 40 pounds like so-and-so that I saw online. And, I'm eating nothing but real food. I'm eating the healthiest food out of everyone that I know, but I'm still overweight, or my blood sugar is still dysregulated, right? So yes, coming back to the foundations, but then there is a time and a place to dig in if you are struggling. And so I think that we're pretty aligned with maybe sort of how we feel about those things, where there is a time and a place, but you have to have those foundations really dialed in. Like, take advantage of all the free stuff, because like you said, that's been working forever. Yeah. So, that's trusted, that's tried and true. And it'll help you save money, and it'll help you not have to get all the testing in the world and do all the things if you dial those things in first. So love that. Also,
you don't have to be as distracted, right? Because if you think the answer is going to be out there, then you're going to be scrolling looking for the answer. But trust me, the answer's already here, working just fine, working great, and has been for a long time. So it's like, if you focus on not being distracted, but taking action, that is the thing that's going to move the needle every time. Yes. And honestly, after doing this for many years, there haven't been, even in the face of hundreds of interviews from all these experts, there really have not been that many things that have changed. There really haven't been that many things where like, oh, I thought it was this way, but actually it's the exact opposite. There have been a couple of minor calibrations, but really once you get there and you follow that truth that works for you, and the foundations of it, there's not going to be a whole lot that changes.
Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, maybe once we get to the singularity and the AI Borg takeover, things are going to get a little different, but I'm pretty sure that eating meat is still going to work even then, and doing some push-ups.
Eat meat, do push-ups, get outside. Love it. Awesome. Well, tell us about your book and then where we could find you.
Yeah. So I've got a Substack at abeljames.substack.com. I'm also at abeljames.com. The Abel James Show is the name of the podcast, and I've written a few books. Fat Burning
Man. What happened to Fat Burning Man?
Oh, I mean, I still have Fat Burning Man, the website, but
I'm just joking.
I enjoy having expansive conversations, and
not only about fat.
It's not always about burning fat, but
I hear you.
Sometimes it's about chewing fat. And then, so I've written a few books that are all over the place. The first one was called Musical Brain, The Wild Diet is health and fitness, a number of cookbooks, one of poetry called Designer Babies, and now I'm working on a new book about longevity that I have conceptualized quite well, but I do need to sit down and do some time in a
Someone
chair on a
smart once
computer,
told me
unfortunately, just cranking it out.
well, I hope that you've trained for this. It sounds
Yes,
like
indeed.
to be
I
able
actually
to
enjoy the process.
focus.
I really
Yeah,
do. As long
that's
as I have
great.
time to do it, which thankfully I have a little. I think it's going to be really cool, and it's one of those subjects like health that I could just think about forever. It's one of those things that's always going to be on your radar, and I'm glad so many other people as well are finally paying attention to longevity, because I feel like
Yeah.
a few years ago there wasn't the interest that there is now.
Yeah. I heard something at the conference that said, like, when men talk about like wanting to live a long time, it's called longevity, but when women want to, it's called anti-aging. And I thought that was kind of funny. I
I
was just
never
like,
thought about
huh.
it that way.
I know.
Interesting.
I never thought about it that way either. But like everything that is marketed to women is marketed about anti-aging.
Wow.
And for men, it's like, we want to live forever. And it's like,
Right.
don't age. Like, just stay, stay fertile, basically, so you still have some use in our, it's an
Wow.
interesting perspective. I just thought it was interesting and not
That
really
is
relevant.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
gonna run with that and examine that a little bit. Put my
Yeah.
psychology degree hat back on.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I will link all your stuff in the show notes. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today and for all the nuggets of wisdom. I appreciate it.
Oh, really, really appreciate you, Danny. Thanks for doing the work that you do. I loved this
Yeah.
conversation.